Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov, and it is great to have you with us for today's eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. Today, we're talking about how to make the most out of your direct mail marketing budget. We have a great presentation ahead, and I'm so happy to be joined by two very special guests from Quad. First, we have Kris Persons, Senior Vice President of Direct Marketing. Kris, so nice to have you with us today.
Nice to be here again. Thank you.
Very happy to have you back. We also have John Puterbaugh, Vice President of Advanced Media and Innovation. John, great to see you.
Great to be here as well.
Thank you. Very much looking forward to the presentation today. And I just wanted to remind our audience that not only are we so excited that you are with us, but you also have the ability to ask questions. So during the second part of the show, Kris and John will be here for a live Q&A. So just use the window on the right-hand side of your screen at any time to submit questions. We will do our best to get to as many of those as possible. We always love to hear from you, so please keep those questions coming. All right, as I promised you, we have a great conversation ahead. Kris, I'm going to pass it to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be here again with you all. And I just wanted to say thank you again to eMarketer for providing this great forum for us to connect and talk about important topics that we know are really prevalent in the industry. Today, we wanted to talk about something that we think is very timely, and it's an important time of year for budgeting. And we know that this is a time where you're going in and you're planning across your organization regarding the nature of how your marketing performed this year and how you really think about the investment that you want to make next year. So as we work with our clients on their budgeting for direct marketing, we thought we'd share some insights and practices that we've learned in helping clients navigate what has been a disruptive and uncertain time in direct marketing. So what we're going to lay out today are some challenges that we see in the market. What's the equation for success when we really think about the balance of really thinking about cost optimization? And then I'm going to transition it to John, and he's going to talk very specifically about an instance where we worked with a client really looking at their entire direct marketing cycle and looking for opportunities where we were able to find $25 million in savings for them over the course of the year and build a roadmap to successfully do that. And then obviously we'd love to hear from you, your questions and comments, and interact with things that might be on your mind. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges. So marketing has become increasingly complicated, we know, and we really come to you guys today with some empathy, thinking about the decisions that you're having to make and how much friction there is, both in navigating things internally as well as externally with partners to deliver seamless consumer communications and experiences. The DM industry has been under disruption probably for the last 24 to 36 months and continues to see challenges and increased pricing and very specifically increased postal costs that are really causing you to have to really evaluate how much money you're putting in the direct mail budget and how you're going to connect with those consumers in meaningful ways. It's a struggle out there. We recently completed some primary research where we asked you all as marketers to really tell us what's on your mind as it relates to planning for direct marketing. And these were three statistics or insights that bubbled up as very important to you all. 44, almost half, are really thinking about budget constraints as it relates to printing, paper, and postage. 43% of you are in some way, shape, or form dealing with declining response rates. And almost a third of you, or a little over a third, are dealing with complexity as it relates to really providing relevant, personalized, and customized messages to your consumers. And what we know is those last two buckets are really tightly correlated. The more that you're able to drive personalized, relevant messaging, the more you're able to really improve response rates. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. These are actually quotes from some of our clients. Some of you may actually be in the audience listening to this today. And what we have clients reporting to us a little bit is that they feel stuck. And they've shared things with us like, I've optimized my direct mail into neutrality. I'm not really sure how to move forward. I worry that I've sacrificed effective communications or effective marketing in a scramble for cost savings. And/or we've already cut everything that we can and we can't really do any more without really thinking about impacting reach. And one of the things that we found is very insightful when clients talk to us is because of the desire and need to drive cost out or to really think about being cost conscious, it's really moved their eye off the ball in terms of important initiatives like personalization and like advancing more sophisticated capabilities in direct marketing to really connect with consumers. So despite the fact that DM remains one of the most effective channels, we know that your budgets aren't growing exponentially and aren't elastic in order to absorb some of these cost increases. So some of the things that we've also heard from clients, I'm wondering are going to ring true for you. We've heard things like there's an automatic decrease in volume to compensate for the increase in postage to remain budget neutral. We've also heard of practices like going back to maybe prior standards, or I'll say dumbing down packages and formats to try and take costs out. And some are sitting out of the mail completely. We also know sustainability is on the minds of all of us as we think about corporate objectives and really being very, very diligent and deliberate about anything that we put into print, because we know that's really important to our consumers. And one of the things that we like to talk about is, what if I could tell you that you could print less and be more effective? And I always think that's very meaningful, because we in fact, we are a large manufacturer and printer, and we believe that you should be printing less and being more effective. So we also hear things from clients like, we want to be thinking about how to do things a little bit differently. It's time to reinvent the channel. It's really time to think about change. And so what we thought we'd also talk about is when you're thinking about change, when you're thinking about reinvention, what's the equation for success that we think is optimal when you're really thinking about reinventing and rethinking the DM cycle? At Quad, we have a point of view that the notion of cost per piece, which is where the industry has primarily been focused, is not the most successful formula for effective direct marketing. And cutting volume is only going to have impact on top line revenue goals for your company. So what are the variables that are part of the equation for success? So cost reduction, not just price reduction, but cost reduction is really about optimizing a cycle. And we know that return on ad spend is a function of all the campaign costs on the denominator and all of the campaign revenue on the numerator. And what's happened over the course of the last couple of years is, as costs have gone up, there's an inflection point in a company to really evaluate the nature of the direct marketing campaigns and how they can continue to drive additional campaign revenue where it can. On the right-hand side, we talk about the cycle of really direct marketing or any marketing, which includes really understanding an audience-first strategy, displaying for them or sharing with them creative that resonates and the right offer. And then it's an evaluation of what's the appropriate channel. In addition, you have components on the real efficiency side that really contribute to that denominator component of the presentation or the equation, which is print and postal optimization. And our finding is that a lot of marketers don't have the expertise internally to really understand how to navigate those two things in a way to bring costs out and to continue to focus on relevancy and effectiveness and top line growth. So one of the things that is our highest aspiration when we work with clients is we really want to find an opportunity to continuously take cost out of the system, continually make sure that we're optimized, and find opportunities for you to be more effective. And, one of the things that's interesting, about a month or so ago, Dr. John and I presented on a topic in eMarketer about making your DM function more like digital. And we talk about optimization in media all the time. We talk about getting waste out of the system and really focusing on audience-first strategies. We really think a lot of those themes are really primary in direct marketing and sometimes can get lost because we don't necessarily, a lot of marketers don't necessarily have that production expertise and or the postal expertise. So some of the things that we want to do is John's going to share with you, I'm going to share a couple more slides and John's going to share with you more specifics about how we went about this in one of our largest clients. So reducing costs. In this particular use case that John's going to share, there were 4 key work streams or components as a part of the formula that you just saw that we found that could be evaluated and tweaked to really provide those deliberate cost savings. The first one is optimizing distribution and postal, streamlining the production, pursuing holdouts as part of a measurement strategy, and really looking at contact optimization. Those 4 components were really the lion's share of really evaluating all of the things that were part of that cycle that can really help the client drive cost out and drive efficacy up. But these aren't the only ones. There are a lot of things in that cycle that can be evaluated as you think about planning for next year that can really be a part of driving efficacy. There are things like list hygiene, audience modeling, looking at your creative production cycle and removing waste out of that, finding measurement tactics and response files that will allow you to maybe test and learn in other channels to see if you can move those response pieces up. So these just represent a couple examples that we found that worked very well for one of our key clients, but there's many other opportunities for you to find synergy and cost optimization in your cycle. The last thing I'm going to touch on before I turn this over to John is a lot of people look at the manufacturing costs when they think about their production budget for print. And if you look at the pie chart that's represented here, manufacturing costs are only 15% of that cycle. Mail and distribution represents 60%. And again, because I think a lot of marketers don't necessarily have the expertise internally, what we find receiving bids and RFPs from clients is that there's often a desire to just compare manufacturing between various print providers that you do business with. But what we believe is that it often dismisses the opportunity to really find major cost optimization and taking cost out by really looking at mail and distribution as part of the valuation process. So it's really worth being critical about postal as you think about looking at your overall cost and make sure that there's transparency in the costs around postal and distribution. And John's going to talk about why that's so important and how you can leverage some of the expertise that John was able to work so successfully with clients to continue to look for ways to take that cost out of your budget and use it towards really driving an effective communication with your consumer. John?
Thanks, Kris. So I want to start on, just talking about the factors that impact postal costs, right? Since, again, this is a good place to start since, as Kris showed, that, the direct marketing cost tied to postage is the highest portion of the spend. You'd think it'd be relatively straightforward, right? The USPS, as a government entity, actually publishes all their rates, and they tell us, here's how you can reduce them. And here's what, if you do more work, we'll let you save more money. And, as we all know, the pricing starts with kind of the type of mail or the format we're sending, right? Whether it's a letter or a postcard or first class or other type of mail. But from there, how it's sorted, the way it's transported, and where you deliver the mail, basically how far can you get it into the USPS network and actual close to the local distribution hubs. These are all factors that can save in the cost. So now I'm going to go into kind of three areas where you can start to kind of dive in and get cost savings as it relates to freight, distribution, and postage. So the first is really vertical integration, right? And oftentimes when you're doing postal and delivery, there's lots of things involved, right? You have planes and trains and trucks, and you have distribution points, and you have to sort things and do stuff. So, a key thing is to limit the number of distribution points. And as with any business, or the more agencies or third parties you get involved, the larger taxes you have on time and money, right? Again, the more partners and touch points, the more you're basically funding overhead, account management, project management, facilities, and so forth. And so by vertically integrating, certainly the postal processing, logistics, and distribution, as well as other functions in marketing, you could save time, you could save money, and most importantly, you really can impact quality of the direct marketing pieces themselves. So beyond friction, you start looking at scale, right? And certainly scale ultimately reduces the amount of work that the USPS has to do. And as you minimize the amount of work, you get extra savings. So for those of you, I had a paper route as a kid, and, it was always easier if I could just deliver a paper to everybody on a mail, on my paper route. Or if actually I had to deliver them by addresses, they were in the order that they had to be delivered. Similarly, like for the post office, if you sort your mail in what's called a walk sequence, or you deliver to a majority of the households, those all save money. And recently, the post office has really indicated they're moving towards pallets as more important than delivering, let's say, the majority of the postal routes. The postal routes themselves, the discounts are related to whether you achieve a high density, which is 125 or more households, or high density plus, which is 300 or more. But ultimately, the more pallets you're delivering and sending them further into the USPS and bypassing their steps, the more money you can save. The next step, in addition to vertical integration and scale, comes around optimization. And we all know, like, if you combine mail streams together, you can achieve higher volumes. And certainly those higher volumes allow us to reduce postage because you have better rates, because you can achieve some of those, better densities and so forth. You also can do different types of list optimization. Many companies know all about this. So for example, if you're 10 addresses short of becoming a high density or a high density plus, you can add 10 names to your list and you'll actually get an overall lower postage for everybody on the list. And so a key part of adding and removing these names is the strategy of where you're actually pulling the names from and really how you're leveraging the learnings to further enhance your effectiveness. So most people simply just take the discount and do not leverage the insights. And so these are all well known in the industry, and certainly whoever you work with should be taking advantage of these techniques. The other type of optimization that I just want to touch on briefly is really comes down to geospatial and multi-channel optimization. So if you're marketing to a wide range of cities, DMAs, or regions, you can really get into advanced optimization techniques where you're really looking at the effective reach. And so for any given budget, depending on the number of stores or locations, you can optimize your channel mix beyond print to achieve the highest overall response. And so again, in summary, if you look at these things when it comes to postage to maximize efficiency and effectiveness, it comes down to integration, scale, and optimization. And so in the case, as Kris mentioned, first let me talk about some pitfalls and then I'll kind of summarize the savings. This is really important. A lot of times, whether you're doing RFPs or you're working with partners to get pricing, there are a lot of things that happen that make things very confusing. So if you want to get at transparency in pricing, you need to do some things. And so here's some pitfalls that we've come across. For example, commingling. That's when you're kind of mixing together mail streams, you can actually get savings. But a lot of times, people that are really good at commingling will have you commingling more than is necessary. And so we found that a lot of times, if you're a high volume mailer, you actually don't need to commingle. It'll cost you more, the charges associated with it, than if you just do direct. Then the other one is based on using assumptions based on estimates. This is, again, we're in the weeds here, but all these savings matter. We always recommend to actually take an actual mailing list from last year or whatever portion makes sense and actually get estimates based on the households on your list. It makes a big difference because otherwise partners and people will actually assume best case scenarios, and you'll get costs that don't really reflect actually what's going to be. The last two areas, hidden fees. Again, as Kris said before, you can't just look at a per piece. You really got to look at additional costs, hidden costs, freight, commingling, surcharges, overages. All these things need to be looked at the total cost to do your direct marketing. And then finally, again, you need to look at everything, I guess, basically the same as the hidden fees things, but make sure that you ask any partner or vendor to let you know whether all the costs are included or not. And so here's an example, for a high volume mailer, as Kris mentioned, if you're spending over $100 million, you can save close to $5 million, even if you're already a very efficient at postage and have been doing it for a while. So I'll turn it over to Kris to say a few words. We're going to get in now streamlining production as another area to make savings.
Thanks, John. Some things that we hear from clients sometimes, especially if we're in the RFP, isn't print commoditized? And I think our point of view is that we would respectfully disagree with that, because you should always be looking at optimizing the full cycle. And the nature of production flexibility becomes really important in that conversation that morphs and changes to the changing marketing needs you have. Oftentimes, historically in the marketplace, we have very format-driven conversations, and the costs or the price are really around format. And one of the things that we like to inform is long-term relationships with clients where production efficiency and production flexibility really become part of the conversation. So we're always testing, we're always learning, and we're always finding continuous improvement in that. So we believe the ability for us to not only be vertically integrated, but also to be able to provide a lot of platform flexibility, give marketers the opportunity to make sure that you can morph and change as you continue to see your marketing needs change, and the way in which you need to reach consumers is really important.
Just to add to that, also when working with partners, it's really important to understand different people have different strengths and constraints and limitations on their platform. So be sure to understand whether the recommendations that are being made to you are based on the limitations of an existing platform or whether it's actually based on, capabilities that fit your business.
One of the observations that John and I made when we were working with a client is if you look at the formats of what the client was supporting, you have multiple lines of business that usually have very specific P&L or return on ad spend goals and objectives and KPIs that are being managed to, and they're operating with a different set of formats, a different audience, and a different set of tactics associated with that. And what that creates, though, is a lot of complexity, and each of those unique formats can create a lot of cost in the system as it relates of potential overlap in audience, creative production that's not being replicated where it's appropriate, and formats that are not taking advantage of production efficiencies as you think about integrating those production runs together and actually taking advantage of postal optimization. So there's a lot of work that can be done just looking holistically at the way in which your lines of business are running direct marketing today, and really thinking about, again, the audience, the creative components to that, and what is the nature of production efficiencies that could be gained by looking holistically at the nature of what's going into the mail and how we might be able to organize it just a little bit differently. I would also say test and learn practices can be more modernized to make sure that you're also test and learning creative in ways that are virtual, and to take print out of the mail as well. So there's a variety of different things on the production side if you look at the lines of business that you have to support and how you could potentially look holistically at each line of business and bring into a more efficient production life cycle over the course of your marketing campaigns and promotions.
Yeah, in addition to getting savings from streamlining your formats, right? Simplifying this, the way to do this is to actually move towards more of an on-demand platform, right? So if you think about conventional printing, oftentimes you have to actually think about maintain and schedule and manage inventory related to envelopes and paper, and there's lots of different stages. And typically, there's also special expertise that's required, right, with different stages as you have a conventional printing process. If you move to more of an on-demand integrated direct marketing platform, you basically can get kind of fully variable, printing, and it's all, as Kris mentioned with the testing, it's fully dynamic, it's variable, everything can be changed in line, and you can go right out to what we call direct to truck, right? And as we mentioned beforehand, if you're high volume enough, or if you're integrated with other people's mailings, you can actually save a lot of money by bypassing a lot of those intervening steps and going directly to the distribution. And then ultimately, as you extend a multi-channel, a multi-touch environment, you start bringing together, right, a data-driven infrastructure. For example, leveraging your marketing automation platform, and then take it with cross-channel, cross-device experiences. And so often, as we mentioned in past webinars and talks together, you really need to start thinking of your offline a lot like you do with your online, and really make it much more dynamic and data-driven. And so as you also marry the advanced optimization techniques that we mentioned earlier and contact strategies, you can really take advantage of cost savings with a multi-channel on-demand marketing platform. By streamlining production, like as we said before, going from 10 to 15 or 20 formats down to 2 to 3, you can save as much as $10 million. And in this case, this is what we did. Again, those formats come through kind of a long history, right? Companies and businesses, as you grow and add things, you build fragmentation, and too often we don't go back and streamline, test, and drive efficiencies out of it. So we're going to touch on 2 other areas. The next one, we hinted at the beginning, is really you need to cut to grow. And another way of saying this is you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And we believe measurement, certainly in direct marketing, comes down to holdouts. The appealing aspect of direct marketing is basically we're communicating directly to audiences that we know, right? Known audiences. Whereas in advertising and digital, often you're communicating indirectly, right, through the walled gardens to unknown audiences. And so when you're dealing with known audiences, direct marketers have long known that you measure success by doing holdouts, and you do lift-over control. And we think of this as an analogy, right? If I'm flying a plane, I need to have the flight controls to decide where I'm going and understand and make changes in real time. And without doing holdouts, as a direct marketer, you don't know whether you're going forward or backwards. And the first step is the holdouts give you big savings, right? If you're not doing them, you actually need to have the discipline to cut. And different businesses, the amount you can cut depends on your response rates and other factors. But this will not only give you immediate savings, but it'll also give you calibration points around kind of response and effectiveness. The last area we're going to hit on are really about optimizing, the number of touches. And, as programs evolve or as we need to drive more response, marketers start to mail a lot of volume and oftentimes to the same people. And for some businesses, that makes a lot of sense, right? If you have the right lifetime value or customer acquisition costs. But oftentimes, you need to really get a contact strategy to really optimize the touches. And this becomes increasingly important as you get into multi-channel. And so really figuring out how do I know whether the right number of touches will convert the right number of people, at the right time. And again, depending on your volume and your different contact strategies, you could find savings, through the touches. In this case, we found, $3.5 million worth of savings. And basically what our recommendation, and before I turn it over to Q&A, is as marketers start sending mail based on actions rather than attributes and dynamics, you'll get better optimization results, right? And achieve more effectiveness. And this is a key part of a good, smart contact strategy. So with that being said, we've kind of gone through 4 areas, as Kris mentioned. These are not the only things, right? There's many ways to drive efficiency and effectiveness. We wanted to, in the season of budget planning, bring up 4 ways that we helped drive $25 million in savings. So I would love to open it up to questions now, and I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, John and Kris. What a great presentation today. I mean, it was so insightful to hear so many of those great strategies you shared for marketers to be more effective and efficient at really optimizing their budgets in direct marketing. And of course, thanks for sharing some of those pitfalls. Those are always important to understand, but also the helpful tips you shared at the end. So again, thank you so much for all of that great data. And right now, I'd love to get right to the Q&A because our audience has been really great at engaging with us. John, the first question for you: how does a marketer identify an optimal contact strategy or frequency? What are your thoughts on how much someone should be contacted?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, again, I come back to, you have to have the reliable data, right? It's back to those flight controls. You have to actually know how many times people are actually being contacted. And in a direct mail only framework or a business, this is relatively simple, right? But actually, as businesses start to add on trigger programs, and a lot of which you bring in outside partners. So we've seen people have multiple trigger programs run by different partners. They lose track of how many pieces of mail are actually being sent to the same people. And this even gets more difficult when you go online, right, with the walled gardens, because you really, again, are dealing with unknown audiences. I mean, they're known to Google, they're known to Amazon, they're known to Facebook, but they're not, revealed to the direct marketers. And so, again, the optimal contact strategy comes back to measurement and having a good sense of whether you're going forward or backwards.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Often we hear questions about how do I do a lot with a budget that I have? Our next question asks, my company doesn't have a huge budget. What's the amount of potential savings on a percentage level? John, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab, and then Kris, feel free to chime in. I mean, in my opinion, whatever the size of the company is, you can always make your direct marketing more efficient and effective, right? And so I believe for smaller businesses, you're much better off focusing on a return on spend and effectiveness, because profitable growth is really much more critical to a new business than savings. There's lots of ways to make savings no matter what the size is. But my recommendation would be really focus on the effectiveness side of your business and then optimize later once you achieve a critical mass.
Kris, any thoughts on that?
Sorry, Marissa, I was just going to offer, again, this comes down to audience first strategies, really understanding the attributes and the behaviors around your audience and really using your dollars towards the things that those audiences that you think are most important to your brand. And I do think that the efficacy side is the place to spend those dollars. And
okay,
hopefully working with a partner that can optimize year over year as well. I think that long-term course of improvement, what do we learn? How do we use that for next year and continue to use that as a way to drive costs out is an important part of your partnership conversation with those around you.
Okay, great tips on savings. I have a follow-up question. How does this type of savings apply to other channels like online or social? Do either of you have thoughts on those channels?
John, do you want to take a first stab and I'll follow?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, with the USPS, again, as we said before, your costs are known. And so you can kind of get your arms around it. It gets challenging as you go to digital because the walled gardens, you're basically living in environments where you're basically bidding and you're at the mercy of dynamics that are out of your control. And the rules are changing and how things are done. And again, I'm going to go back, for the umpteenth time here on measurement. We've hit on this before, but we recommend looking at incremental return on ad spend. It's much more reliable than attribution. We think attribution is a fool's errand, and basically you need to have very strict measurement and incrementality controls when you're getting in multi-channels, and it's especially important as you move online.
The only thing I wanted to add to that is I think in digital, the emergence of digital has brought with it a much more efficient way of looking at audience first and being agile in the delivery of in the optimization around messaging. And I think one of the things that we see, because we manage digital and we manage offline, is we see the opportunity to bring some of those best practices into print. So you're really looking at audience first. Are you really optimizing against the best audience, given what we know about your brand and given what we know about where they like to interact with you the most, and optimizing that contact strategy. So I think that there's a convergence of sorts that can happen that can be leveraged across. In direct marketing, we often hear that there's poor list management. It's somewhat antiquated in the way that a lot of marketers look at their list, where they might be very proficient in digital. We need to bring those best practices over to print.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing more on those other channels. Kris, at the beginning of the presentation today, you talked a lot about optimization. What's the most common optimization strategy that Quad sees?
I think one of the common themes that we see is production efficiency over time. The more we get to know a marketer and the more that we understand the nature of some of the challenges internally, I think we get really good at delivering production efficiency, whether that's on the manufacturing floor in terms of the presses, whether that's in the creative production that we pursue, the data integration. That is, I think, a superpower for us as we think about the continuous improvement that we always like to offer to clients as we work with them long term. And then as we get an opportunity to look at their whole cycle, I think the optimizations that we can offer, again, are really looking at refining the audience strategy, refining the contact strategy. But I will share that, in the spirit of where clients, and marketers have shared early on, I said that they feel that they've optimized themselves into a corner or they're somewhat neutralized. I think it's the fear of change. I think the fear of change is inertia that exists, that they know the KPI. It's kind of the devil you know versus the devil you don't. The KPIs that you get today in pursuing whatever return or investment strategy you have in marketing. And the fear of change is pretty considerable. So some of the things that we also like to do is how do you test and learn in a way that is comforting and gives you knowledge and insight that makes you more willing and apt to change in other areas. So I think once we get a marketer kind of as fully optimized as we can, there's an opportunity to really help test and learn in some additional areas that can bring greater return on the efficacy side of the equation.
Think you. Our next viewer comes to us from a nonprofit who is doing a lot of mailing to donors. What do you think about premiums like labels and notepads? I think this is a great one for both of you, actually. So, John, do you want to start?
Yeah, I guess I would probably defer to Kris on this one. I've seen it work right in business, certainly in B2B marketing. I've seen premiums work, and especially there's a lot of really nice high-end mail prep you could do too with coatings and formats and envelopes and so forth. And certainly seen that been effective as part of business to business marketing. Not sure as much about the nonprofit industry.
Yeah, we actually did some due diligence, and I don't have it at the ready. I don't know if that particular viewer would be able to contact us, but we actually did some due diligence recently because this is a political campaign cycle, and we often support a lot of advocacy, nonprofit, and political campaigns. I think one of the findings is that some of that interest in consumers is waning a bit because they believe in sustainability. They're trying to be thoughtful. And I think one of the things that we see in consumers is they're very values driven. They want to be connected with the values of the organization that they're connected with. So I'd be happy to follow up and provide more insight in that particular area. But I think what we're finding is that they prefer in some instances to be more connected to the values of the organization and what they stand for. And that kind of ignites their passion and their connection.
Okay, thank you so much. John, we had a few questions on the chart that you talked about, specifically on the holdouts category, which equated to about 7.5 million in total savings. Actually, a few of our viewers asked if you could explain more about these holdouts. How do you quantify that segment of the circle chart that you shared?
Well, it's embarrassingly simple. If you hold out, meaning don't mail 10%, for example, those are stuff you're not mailing and paying postage on. And it seems ridiculous, but you have to do that. But in a lot of our direct marketing, I mean, we'll do as much as a 50% holdout if possible. I mean, you really need to be able to compare what happens if you do nothing. And a lot of businesses get so nervous, and especially in the holiday season, that they have to mail as many people as possible. And you're really not learning because, again, this idea of cutting, as Kris said, you can kind of cut to grow. You really need to do those holdouts. And so that's and the amount you hold has to do with the statistical significance, right? So if you, depending on how many things you're testing and variables, will tell you how many holdouts you need, and whether that's 1%, 5%, 10%, and so forth.
Okay.
One of the things I just wanted to interject
Kris,
on holdouts, so is apprehension that I think clients have to change from their current state of measurement to a holdout strategy, because in some instances you might see a short-term impact on performance, but oftentimes you see a long-term benefit by being able to compare against what you're mailing and how you're mailing and how that's performing against the holdout. So again, we would advise to really try testing and learning in this particular area to make sure that it's in line with the marketer goals and objectives. They feel comfortable with the change in direction.
Well, and you can calculate it, right? Because marketers know their expected response rates. And if you hold out 10%, you would expect this much revenue, and then you multiply that times your savings, you have a good sense of, you can set expectations internally of what that delta will be. And again, you're taking one step forward to take, one step backwards to go 4 steps forward.
Okay, thank you both so much. That was great. I love the back and forth between your two perspectives on that one, so thank you. We are going to take one more question. So Kris, you also talked about reducing print. So doesn't a reduction in print cost Quad money?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to a certain extent, certainly if we print less things, that's, less revenue, but I think we look at the long game. I think from our perspective, we are better suited to be in a position where we want to help marketers drive outcomes. And over time, once we're able to do that, we can also help them, like I said, test and learn and optimize in other channels. So the print piece is just one component of driving outcomes for a marketer. And when we are able to work with clients year over year, we can deliver those benefits to that client, because as we streamline those productions and look for those efficiencies and optimize in production and optimize in postal, that just brings opportunity for us to leverage budget and other ways for that marketer. That's really more on the important stuff, like, in some instances, we've been able to target a new program or a new set of consumers because of the optimization that we see. So we're playing a long game, and we're looking for really driving efficacy for our clients and being on the side of truth and transparency and, providing effective outcomes. So in some instances, in the case of this particular client, it was a short-term impact for us, but we have a much longer game in mind in terms of really wanting to be a partner to them and bring useful outcomes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that example. I think that was a great way to round out the conversation today. Kris, John, it was so wonderful to be with both of you. Great content, great deck, great visuals, great data. Thank you again for answering also all the questions from our audience. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for providing the opportunity again. Nice to be here.
Thank you.
So before we wrap up, I'm just going to take a moment to tell you more about our upcoming events here at eMarketer. Mark your calendar for Friday, November 3rd for Attention, which is our half-day live virtual summit focused on trends and predictions for 2024. You will not want to miss that. Registration is now open on our events page. And also, while you're on that page, you can sign up for Tech Talk webinars and also our other live webinars that we host. And finally, keep an eye on your email for the link to today's recording. Thank you all for your time. And thanks again to Kris, John, the entire team at Quad, and of course, our Studio II crew, which is our production team behind the scenes, for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.